This episode is sponsored by Now Foods, one of the largest and most reputable brands in the natural health industry. Now coming in their 50th year in the natural health business. 50 years. Unbelievable. That's fantastic. There's one product from Now that I give to pretty much everybody, and that's the Pure MCT oil. For anyone who's not familiar, MCTs are medium-chain triglycerides, which are fats found naturally in things like coconut and palm kernel oil that are more rapidly, more easily digested than other types of fats. So because these fats are so quickly metabolized by the liver, numerous studies suggest that this expedited process encouraged the use of fat for energy rather than for storage, which, as you can imagine, would be a big deal in our culture. I give MCT oils to everybody. Between our American diets and our overwork schedules, nobody is really getting sufficient levels of proper nutrition to compensate for our busy lifestyles. And it tastes like nothing. I know a bunch of people who put it in their morning coffee. My ex puts it in her booze. You can add it to soups, juice, your fancy pants, LaCroix water, anything. You can find the Now Pure MCT oil right in our online store. Just go to our website and go to store, and we'll provide a link right on the website, right on this interview page. And while you're there, make sure you sign up for membership. Subscribe to become a member. Just go to the Support Us page, or if you go right to the online store, it's the very first selection in the store. Become a member. It's $1 a month. And that $1 a month, I mean, it's $1 a month, $12 a year. That one keeps us able to keep doing this and keeps Paul and I in business and able to keep bringing great guests and doing cool things. More importantly, though, is you get discounts on everything in the online store. So $1 gets you discounts on everything. $1 immediately gets you 10 to 30% off right off the bat. Even more than that, you'll get access to members-only bonus content, invites to special events that are available only to subscribers, only to members, prizes, gifts, raffles. We'll be doing things monthly, and each month we'll be adding more and more features. So make sure you sign up. It's a great way to support us and support yourself. All the things you hear us talking about, they're right there available for the store. Simple, easy, and you get discounts on everything once you become a member, especially the Now MCT oil. So sign up today, get some oils in you. Start tomorrow. Start today. Start tomorrow. Whatever.
If you listen closely, you can hear the voices.
I can hear them whisper their legacy to you. Go on, lean in.
From somewhere deep inside the evergreen forests of the Pacific Northwest.
Seattle!
Everything you know is wrong.
Wrong, sir. Wrong.
With Jeremy Horn.
You're an inhuman monster. I said good day.
And with that, let's get to our first guest. Dr. Neil Levine is a board-certified clinical nutritionist with an additional degree in advanced nutritional laboratory assessment. He's been widely published in magazines and newspapers and medical journals, in addition to numerous appearances on television and radio. He's currently serving as the senior education manager and a product formulator for Now Foods, where he continues his work as an educator and lecturer for organizations worldwide. Dr. Levine also serves or has served on several highly respected instructional boards and associations. He's intensely knowledgeable on a number of subjects. He served on the technical advisory board for the Non-GMO project from 2007 to 2009, and that is where I focused our conversation. My interactions with the general public over the past 10 years include a plethora of opinions with very little true understanding of the basic facts, the most basic facts. And it's very difficult to have a functional conversation when everybody is dealing with a vastly different set of facts. So this episode is meant to be a very remedial introduction to the basic facts and, quite frankly, prejudices of genetically modified organisms. So enjoy. Well, let's get right into it. Welcome. This is kind of interesting to me, is because GMOs is what we're going to be talking about for the most part, and whatever else you feel like, is such a politicized topic when it's just fact-based. And people, as soon as you mention the subject, people immediately start machine gunning at you their views, where it's like, whoa, let's reel it in and just look at the basic facts. So I think it's interesting that most people, I don't think, even have a remedial understanding of what GMOs are. They just see it as a political topic being bandied about and shoved at them. So I'd love to hear just from the beginning, what for someone that has only seen it as a news report, never actually done any sort of digging, any sort of legwork, and see what those words actually mean.
Well, GMOs stand for genetically modified organisms. And basically, you genetically engineer, which is a term with a lot of baggage, because according to some scientists, we have genetically engineered our crops throughout the entire history of agriculture. In fact, there's one interesting study that's not a new study, it's decades old, but the title is something like, "Why are so many of our foods cyanogenic? Why do they contain cyanide?" And they contain cyanide because we have selected throughout the history of agriculture crops that are more pest resistant. Crops that are higher in cyanide are more pest resistant. So the varieties of grains and broccoli and apples, peaches, a lot of the foods that we eat are fairly high in cyanide. But that doesn't mean they're toxic. We've actually developed along with them to tolerate that. But that's one form of genetic engineering. What we're talking about is the stuff that could only be done in laboratories. You're taking basically a capsule of genetic material that's been artificially created or taken from something else, often put into a structure. A common one would be a virus or another bacteria, or even an artificial genetics framework to add the gene to. And then typically you can use a virus or other techniques to implant that genetic material into a cell. And then you have, say, a genetically modified seed that is resistant to a pesticide or has some other traits. But taking a gene that's not going to be available by crossbreeding, by traditional crossbreeding. Now, there are advantages to the genetic revolution we've had. The genome has been deciphered, and they can now figure out all the genes in a plant. It's now easier to predict what's going to happen when you crossbreed plants before you crossbreed them than to just do it trial and error and see what happens. It's predicted that might actually be more efficient than the genetic splicing. However, genetic splicing is patentable.
Right, that's the key.
And patents are profits.
Yep.
And since the 1990s, universities have gotten into the game. Professors and their grad students are setting up corporations and patenting the results of their research. Universities are often sharing in that. And the old adage in universities, publish or perish, where the university professor had to publish papers and add to their resume in order to get tenure or be respected in their field.
Now it's monetize. Monetize your discoveries.
Now it's patent or perish.
Yeah, patent or perish.
In certain fields.
Yeah.
And just as we've seen in agriculture, where the agriculture extension agents and the universities are being trained by the pharmaceutical companies and the pesticide companies, we're seeing where the biotech companies are taking over a lot of the university research into genetics, plant sciences, crops, and infiltrated that all.
It's a double-edged sword because universities, they need the money. They need money for conducting those studies. Like, hey, here this company showed up and is going to dump a bunch of money on you too. That's tough. It's hard to get grants. It's brutal.
It is, but there's a lot of money flowing into the biotech industry. It's probably larger than the health food industry today.
Mm-hmm, by far, yeah.
And so we're looking at these folks who have an incentive to, as you say, monetize the agriculture. So GMOs were against the advice of the professional advisory boards in the FDA and the USDA. It was a political decision to say they're not significantly different from conventional crops.
Well, how long ago did you see it start to emerge?
And that happened in 1992 in the closing days of the first Bush administration.
Gotcha.
There was a Dan Quayle, the vice president, had a commission that decided there was no difference. What's interesting, if you actually look at the research, I don't know if your listeners are old enough to remember in 1989 when L-tryptophan, an amino acid, there was a bad batch from a Japanese pharmaceutical company that ended up killing dozens of people and sickening a number of people. And what people don't know, and this was published in the New England Journal of Medicine the next year and in a Canadian journal, that they used a genetically engineered bacteria to ferment and produce the amino acids. So a lot of times, not only probiotics, but amino acids, enzymes, some vitamins are produced by natural fermentation using microorganisms like bacteria. And in some cases, they use genetically modified ones. Well, apparently, there was some mutation over several generations of this bacteria.
That they didn't account for, because how could they? Yeah.
Yeah, they were not tracking the genetics and making sure it was breeding true. It produced a lot more of certain toxin. I think it was called Peak X or something like that, because they never really identified it. And the filtration system was not capable of getting rid of it, and it ended up in this one batch from this one company. But it's the first case I know of a genetically modified GMO organism contributing to people's deaths and illnesses. Despite all this, the FDA basically gave a broad approval. And in the mid to late 90s, genetically modified crops started creeping in. Now, we've all been told, and I see this in editorial pages of newspapers, we need genetically modified crops to feed the world.
I hear that all the time, and it's...
And in the most rigorous university studies, there is no advantage to growing GMO crops in terms of crop yield, costs per acre, and other factors that affect farmers. In fact, I've read articles that many farmers are switching from GMO to non-GMO.
Because better for the soil, better for their land, better for...
Well, they can't afford the much higher priced seed requires, in about 80% of the cases, requires generous applications of pesticides.
Right. You got to keep buying from the source, yeah.
And
it's like franchising. It's like a franchise.
And you're buying the seed and the pesticide from the same company.
Manufacturer, yep, absolutely.
So, with that in mind, you have a
pretty big conflict of interest.
You have a conflict of interest. We're told that genetically modified crops are more nutritious. There is not a single commercially developed crop that is. Golden rice is the poster child for this theory.
Right.
It's been under development for over a decade. It's not commercially available. At best, if they would eat, say, 50 grams of rice a day, eat ounces of rice, eat bowls of rice, it would give about 50% of the RDA of vitamins.
Who cares? Yeah.
We have Vitamin Angel Charity that distributes vitamin A capsules to children and does the same thing basically for 50 cents a dose. That's
interesting. That's always bandied about. It's always told to us that as consumers that GMO foods are going to be more nutritious, have more nutritional value. But it's when people hear that, and when they don't realize it's the same as, remember when they were doing Wonder Bread was like vitamin enriched or enriched with iron? It's not food form minerals. They're like enriched with minerals, not food-based minerals, chemicals. It's enriched with chemicals, but people equate that with value. You know what I mean?
Or you take out dozens of nutrients and you put in a handful of other types of nutrients.
Right.
The iron in there in the fortified flour is an oxidized form typically. That's not too good for you.
Yeah.
But we were told in the 1950s that atomic power would be too cheap to meter.
Right.
These promises are not new.
Yeah. It's just how they play out. But we've seemed to have bottomed hook, line, and sinker again, despite living in an age where information is readily available. It seems that people are still resistant to even discussing it. I thought it was interesting you were talking about how the cyanide over time, I mean, millennia ago, there was probably a wider diaspora of fruits and vegetables that our ancestors ate, you know what I mean, 4,000 years ago. And then, again, the more robust ones and the ones that are more resistant to pests are going to survive. So what we're eating now is what's left. So that's, like you said, that's just nature creating its own modifications, right? It's right. When we begin tinkering with the science behind it, what people I don't think realize is that we've taken a leap from these things basically essentially evolving over time, growing and changing, to now you've taken an apple and then altered it into an apple flavored Pop-Tart and be like, here's this food. That's not food. An apple and apple flavored Pop-Tart are not the same thing. And yet I don't think people seem to see that correlation.
Yeah, and I mean, if it's a gradual thing that's happening over generations,
we can evolve with it and we can develop the enzymes.
Yeah, and not only that, but if we eat it and we're not getting sick, for example, what is the antidote for cyanide? It's cobalamin, vitamin B12. That's what you use
So it can
to
methylate to then
detoxify.
clear it out. And
So, yeah, having B12 in your diet is a correction for that.
yeah.
So we evolved to have more foods with B12 to compensate, possibly.
Right.
It was completely unconscious, but our bodies knew we were healthier if we eat these things versus not eating these things.
Right. You mentioned the golden rice. That's, again, something that's been promised to us for years. I've never seen it hit the marketplace.
It's not on the market.
It's not
still
available,
under
right?
development. They can't produce it to the point where it's going to make sense.
Yeah.
In terms of how much somebody has to eat a day.
Right.
And giving them enough vitamin A that they're going to get 100% of the RDA. They can't even get close.
Ugh, can't even get close.
Right. And there's unintended consequences from genetic tinkering. And we've seen this in many published reports. I'm talking about peer-reviewed studies in scientific journals.
Where usually? Do you notice, like, Europe or Asia or who tends to be more interested in these?
There have been studies all over the world.
So, okay.
The United States, too.
Okay.
So, for example, even if you're looking at companies like Monsanto, that's one of the major producers of GMOs, they have supplied data in patent applications and in published studies that actually show, in some cases, unintended changes in nutritional values in GMO crops versus conventional crops.
Yeah.
And I've got a whole PowerPoint presentation referenced with scientific studies showing a large number of these kind of anomalies. For example, they're trying to get more vitamin A in a crop, and the vitamin E content goes down.
Yeah.
They try to make a cotton crop that was resistant to a pesticide, and there were changes in the proteins, the fats, and the other nutritional values of that crop. Genetically modified soybeans, according to Monsanto's data, had about 7 times as much of the anti-nutrients as regular soybeans. And normally cooking gets rid of those anti-nutrients,
They remain.
makes them manageable. They seem to be heat resistant
Good
in the
Lord.
GMO.
Yeah. Nature's self-correcting, smarter than we are. Like you were saying, like I don't think people understand how insidious it is, because it seems like broad concepts. What we're talking about right now seems like broad concepts, but it's well publicized, and nobody. That's the scary part. We like to believe in these shadowy government things, and no, it's right in front of you. There's no conspiracy. Everyone's laid out all the facts for you, and you still made that decision. McDonald's made an association a little while. Was it with Clorox, right? To instill Clorox bleach into burgers to prevent E. coli.
Yeah.
So people immediately went, great, wonderful, thank you, McDonald's, for protecting us from the dangers of E. coli, as opposed to going, why are you giving us bleach? Stop feeding me bleach. People had the exact opposite reaction. Whereas instead of, people that I tend to talk to were like, oh yeah, the second I heard that, we don't like giving our kids fast food anyway, but we were done with McDonald's. Unfortunately, 9 out of 10 people are going the opposite. They're like, hey, McDonald's using science to improve our lives, but you're eating bleach. They're feeding you bleach. How is that okay, right?
And why is there E. coli in the products
To begin with. Why, yeah, exactly. This shouldn't be a problem in the first place. Like mad cow disease. Stop feeding cows to other cows. That's not how nature does it. This problem shouldn't exist. Absolutely nonsense. Yeah. Well, you have a study that I always thought was fantastic that I reference people all the time, was the zoo, I think it was in Denmark, that chose to use, or basically wanted to find out for themselves the benefits or value of using it. So not for any political gain. They just want to measure apples to apples themselves.
Well, it wasn't really a study. It was just at the Copenhagen Zoo. They noticed that when they fed bananas to the chimps, that they would eat them peel and all if they were organic, and they would peel them and eat only the insides if they were non-organic. And they had no way of knowing. There were no stickers or anything. They're not going to put stickers on them if they're giving them to the animals. So, they simply noticed that there's a difference. The animals detected a difference.
They know, yeah. Well, I've people that'll engage with, because I don't like to argue. I just want to engage. I just go like, let's just go over some facts. I've kind of explained that to them, because and people always say, well, if that's true, which it is, right? If that's true, why aren't they funding more studies like that? And like you just said, it's not a study for one. It was a zoo simply trying to figure out what maybe we can cut some costs, or maybe try this. There was no intent. There was no ultimate gain. Secondly, who's going to fund that? Do you see what I'm saying? So nobody looks at the money trail, where how much money is dumped into getting certain information out, whereas when certain other things come out, there's no gain. So that's just the information, whether you take it or leave it how you want it. Even in Washington State, when we had the GMO labeling, it was clear who. Pure politics, where the money was coming from, and the money coming in to restrict GMO labels was astronomical. And you saw who the big players were, and it's crushing. It's crushing. Is because it's like getting sued by Viacom. Well, they're going to get 30 lawyers against your one. You're just not going to win. So it was amazing that enough people were. Aware enough to block that legislature, and that kind of made these companies realize, I don't know how much money we want to keep dumping into falling. This is not the sword we want to fall on, which was a huge victory. But I think it's a hard fought one that people don't realize we barely eked out. You know what I mean? And the next time that happens, we have to be more cognizant. It's nice if the more people know about GMOs, the more skeptical. And there's nothing wrong with asking questions. You know, if Mercedes has made cars the same way for generations, suddenly they decide to switch to 3 wheels. You're like, explain why. What's your reasoning? Why are you selling us a 3-wheeled car? So I really, any way to get people to ask those types of questions. What would you think would be good for just the average person, average consumer that might be overwhelmed? What are some things that they could look at or just try to be aware of?
Well, I thought it was kind of stupid of the biotech industry in the first place to come out with these self-serving products that predominantly require the use of more pesticides. Because and the pesticides are undergoing more scrutiny now than they have in the last 20 years because their use has skyrocketed with the GMOs. Because 80% of the crops being grown require a lot of applications of pesticides to them.
So suddenly now that it's cost value, so money talks,
and it's a patented seed that costs more money.
Yep.
But if they had come out first with something that was more nutritious, with something that required less water. Or was somehow better for the environment, their PR would have been a whole lot easier than trying to pretend that they have these things, which they don't.
But American public doesn't like being lied to. You know what I mean? When we see a celebrity or something like that they go, if they admit to what they did, the American public is very forgiving. But if you start off with a lie and then dig deeper in the lie, that's when people start to feel cheated.
Yeah, but imagine if they had started labeling in the 1990s GMOs with this requires less pesticides. This requires less water. This is better for the environment. This contains more nutrients.
They would have locked in.
And everyone would say this is a great thing.
Right.
Instead, they came out with these self-serving products.
Right. And people can tell when they're getting marketed too. Yeah. You know what I mean? Where it's like, hi, I'm Jeff, and you should buy Jeff's brand of blah, blah, blah. It's like, all right, Jeff, we know who gains here. It's obviously you, right? It's it's almost like we all forget we forget the past immediately. So my generation, even with GMO, when I have these conversations, and people I go, but what about these pesticide resistant crops where now these mosquitoes and all these bugs are now super bugs. We're creating super bugs, right? And nobody's denying that, right? How is that not a problem? And it's just like DDT in my generation. We have a template. It's already happened. We screwed it up. Why are we still making new versions of DDT? That's what blows my mind. How everyone's just so readily okay with new, different versions of DDT just because it's not simply called that. It's called.
Well, they're actually saying we should come back with DDT.
I heard
because
so out of control
because it helps control malaria.
Yeah.
And malaria is a bigger killer than DDT.
Yeah.
So you're picking the lesser of two evils.
Right.
I mean, you're right. There's a short-term benefit to a lot of this genetic modification. Something's going to be pesticide resistant. That means it's going to be pesticide resistant for maybe 5-10 years and start losing it because of the resistant crops. The selection of genetic traits, whatever who's going to be resistant and lives is going to pass that on to their offspring.
Right.
So, I mean, this is well-known natural selection that's been shown time and time again. We know it's a short-term solution. They're polluting the world with both genetically modified things that are getting out and spreading, and with the resistance to where now pesticides don't work, even natural things. They bred a pesticide in some of the crops where it has a protein that's normally made by an organism that infects caterpillars and kills the caterpillars. Well, now that protein is in the crops.
Yikes.
So we're eating it.
Yeah.
They found that protein in the bloodstream of pregnant women and their fetuses.
Oh, boy.
And nobody has a clue
What sort of
that's gonna
effects it
do.
has, yeah.
Nobody's ever studied that.
Never. It'll be. It's just like Agent Orange or anything like that, where a generation later they're like, "Whoops, looks like we never should have administered this," and we're the guinea pig generation, unfortunately. Currently,
Or thalidomide.
thalidomide, absolutely, yeah, exactly. Most people here don't. The English people know very well about thalidomide, but it never got here, did it? We just know the cautionary tale, right?
Well, I know. I went to high school with somebody who had a defect in his legs,
Okay.
in his bones, that he attributed to thalidomide.
Yeah,
I don't
okay.
know if he grew up in England and
Gotcha.
moved to the United States.
Gotcha. And I think it was enough of a trend had shown in England. I think by the time it got here, they probably got it off the market quicker than they had there.
And he had one leg longer than the other, and he had to have an operation to cut it down.
Yeah.
And they were breaking saws on his bone. It was so strong. It was
Holy!
so different
Because it
from
had
a
adjusted.
normal-
Yeah, it had adjusted for his lifetime of
Well, not just that, but it was some side effect of the drug.
Oh, I got you from the way that the body had built up. That
Yeah.
I see. Interesting. What about because you see so many things that I'm sure are shocking and alarming. Are there certain things that you've seen that even for you, you're like, woof, that's a new one for me?
In terms of GMOs?
Yeah. Or in general, I mean, science in general is always changing. Yeah.
Well, I mean, there's so much mythology out there. We get
That's true.
calls every day about other issues. One of them are the stearates in supplements that are used as lubricants,
Right.
vegetable waxes. And people are saying stearic acid or magnesium stearate are toxic and they affect the immune system and things like that. And I've traced it back to a 1990s test tube study that's been misappropriated by a certain vitamin company I shall not name today that started advertising, we don't use this, look what it does.
Yeah.
But a test tube study doesn't prove anything. A test tube doesn't have a liver,
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
example, unless
Yep.
you throw a liver in there. But it's still not going to work the same way as eating something internally. When stearic acid is in every fat on Earth, it's 30% of the fat in beef. It's 30% of the fat in cocoa butter. It's
Yeah.
in fish oil.
Yeah.
It's in all the fat.
Poisonous.
Coconut.
Yeah, exactly. Poisonous things to liver, like coconut.
And we're eating 9 or 10 grams a day in our diet.
Yeah.
And they're worried about thousands of a
Exactly.
gram
Yeah.
in a supplement.
It's unfortunate how just that's exactly the whole purpose of what we're doing and why we're
Yeah.
talking today is one tiny pointless piece of misinformation just grows exponentially until it becomes fact, which has devastating consequences. It affects there's a famous one is the Great Wall of China is visible from space.
Right.
No, it's not. Not a single astronaut has ever said that, right? And I was just kind of curious because I heard, I don't know if it was John Glenn or Buzz Aldrin, whoever's still alive. I think it was Buzz Aldrin, basically being like, well, there's like, 12 of us that have been, you know what I mean, out there, and we talk. And none of us has ever seen the Great Wall of China. Where did this come from? Where did this go? I was like, that's a good question. Where did it come from? And I did a little digging. Some 1930s Ripley's Believe It or Not said it, you know what I mean? And at a time where you couldn't instantly vet information through the internet or anything like that, and people were like, it's fascinating. Ripley's was a big deal. I remember being a kid and reading those things and looking at, look how tall that guy is. Look at those crazy
Right.
fingernails, right? So it sticks with you and it locks in. To this day, if you and I went out and asked 100 people, 99 would be like, yeah, of course, Great Wall of China is visible from space. Absolutely not. Not true. That's a silly one. But
Yeah, it's not wide enough that you'd see it very far.
yeah, you
out.
barely see the Great
Yeah.
Barrier Reef, let alone what's left of it. But that's like the I'm curious. Are there other mythologies? Because I think that's what gets hyper focused on from GMO manufacturers' perspectives. Is there is a lot of misinformation on the opposite end as well. You know what I mean? So there's some diligency on asking the right questions and not propagating those types of myths, because then it furthers that point. It furthers the point that you're actually trying to disprove.
Well, I mean, another myth is that organic foods are not more nutritious
Yeah.
or different from conventional foods. And they've done dozens of studies I've seen with what they call matched pairs. And with that, you grow the same variety on adjoining plots. And one of the plots is treated organically, and the other one is treated with conventional farming, not GMO, but normal pesticides and fertilizers and things like that. And you look for differences. So they've not only found differences in yield that favors the organics, and the USDA and the Rodale Institute and a couple of universities, I think it was Cornell and University of Maryland or one of those kind of schools, have done a study for over 20 years of conventional versus organic.
20 years.
So it's a long term.
Yeah.
And after the first 4 years, the organic is superior in yield, in carbon sequestration. They say if the entire country went to organic, we wouldn't have a carbon problem in terms of global warming, climate change, that kind of thing.
Why are we trucking stuff in from God knows where? Yeah.
You would actually be putting that carbon in the soil where it belongs.
Yeah. That's incredible.
So that's actually a big issue.
Yeah.
The amount of water needed is less on the organics because the organic matter in the soil, the carbon-based matter, holds more moisture.
Yeah.
So it lasts. You get much higher yields during drought years.
Yeah.
And in general, the size of the yield per acre was higher in the organics. The cost for the seed was less.
Yeah.
There was virtually no cost for the fertilizers and pesticides and things. It was a much better deal for the farmers.
And I think that's what I mean. I remember like DuPont and GE, just horrible records in polluting the environment, right? Until this, and always spent millions of dollars on studies to try to disprove the value of sustainable anything, you know, anything involved in limiting pollution and things like that, because they have an interest. Until they found out how much cost saving there was in going green, and now suddenly GE is the world's leader in going green, and now DuPont's running studies on like, we do so much to keep the environment green. Really, you know, not until you found out it was profitable and had a benefit. And so I think that's kind of the problem is people like to lock in, like you said, that myth. They like to lock in the idea that it's just marketing. You're just paying more for blah blah blah, and it's because so little. What is it, like 1% to 2% is really all organic farming in the country?
Yeah, it's small.
It's small. So it's if more farms adopted that, the price comes down. There's pure economics, and then suddenly that argument suddenly eliminates itself, right? So it's amazing to me how people lock that in, even if you show them 20 years worth of data. Right? It's the fact that what you just laid out is organic farming wins so overwhelmingly in every category. It's like not a single category. You know what I mean? That's what usually gets people to change their minds. Like, well, okay, if it was one or two, I can understand. I might have to change my decision makings if it's winning that much. Because I tell them, if you buy a $1 apple and then a $2 apple, and this $2 apple has 15 times the nutrients, where's your value? You didn't save $1. You lost 15. You lost 14. You know what I mean? Right. Is equating that. I don't think people equate the value that way.
And looking back long term at the studies, the organics, they used to look at the vitamins and minerals only. Mm-hmm. About 15 years ago, they really started looking at the polyphenols and the other compounds in the plants. And they found they were much, much higher in the organics than the non-organics. But also looking at vitamins and minerals, they're finding that as well, that there's a significant difference in most of the studies of, as I mentioned, matched pairs where they're growing the same variety and the same soil, but treating the soil and the crop differently with organic or non-organic treatments. And there's also issues like animals that graze versus eating grains.
Yeah.
And there's different nutrients in the grasses they eat.
That their bodies are more adept at processing.
They're not eating a lawn. They're eating grasses.
Right.
It's not a lawn. But the government's not allowing them to talk about there's significant differences in things like CLA and GLA and vitamin E and a lot of the fat-soluble nutrients in the organic milk, for example, than in non-organic milk. And even in England and other countries, they say you can't make a claim for these things on your milk because normal milk doesn't have it. So saying you have more of it is kind of irrelevant because this is not something we expect to find in milk anymore.
Right. Yeah. Sad.
But again, speaking about historic things, people assume their food labels are accurate.
Right.
And a lot of food labels are based on USDA food tables, the Department of Agriculture, that were started to be built around 1940.
Yeah.
And I don't think you can find a crop where they're using the same seeds.
Yeah.
The soil is the same as it was.
Yeah.
They're not using changes of fertilizers or pesticides or harvesting techniques, ripening techniques, storage techniques.
Yeah.
It's a completely different crop. So when they actually start testing some of these things almost 20 years ago at UC Davis and schools like that, University of Texas, they started finding there's huge differences. And that, for example, the amount of calcium you got from a carrot in 1940, you now have to eat 4 carrots to get that much calcium.
Yeah, blows my mind. And that's been repeated. I mean, I saw U.S. News and World Report. I saw Newsweek did a thing. Every time I see that, just because I see things from our perspective, and I ask other people, I go, have you seen those things where our grandparents eat one piece of broccoli, we have to eat 4 to 5 times the amount of broccoli to get the same. And who eats enough broccoli anyway? You know what I mean? Now you have to eat 5 times more. People are like, yeah, I have been seeing that. I'm like, doesn't that shock you? Doesn't it alarm you? But it's almost like epidemic used to mean freak out. Everybody freak the hell out, right?
Yeah.
Now there's so many epidemics are so common that people are just kind of like, another epidemic. I'm like, no, epidemic means this is horrifying. You know, no matter how good we try to be, 4 to 5 times, that's insurmountable almost.
Yeah, and even looking at things like cheese or milk, and you're seeing the amount of iron in that milk is declined by up to 90% in some products.
90%, yeah. Just because the Industrial Revolution is we don't do any crop rotating, we just don't.
Because they're eating grains instead of greens.
Yeah.
Greens contain iron.
And also, human beings are designed to eat from the seasons. You know, we're going into like root vegetable season now. We've all become like Roman emperors. I want strawberries right now. Like, well, it's the middle of winter. Well, get them from Ecuador, full of chemicals. Okay, right? The profitability of just growing that one crop over and over and over 30, 40 years, suddenly, like you said, depletes things 90%. How do we change it? Where does we go?
Well, I mean, there's a localvore movement where people are trying to buy more local, and I know in certainly the Seattle region, Portland, there's many cities where that's a big issue.
Yeah.
And people are proud of their local things, their local wines, their local cheeses, their local apples, whatever it is. But again, if your local soil is, say, low in selenium,
yeah, that's what you're getting.
then you're not going to get enough selenium.
Right.
That's a reason why dietary supplements come in. People say it's expensive urine. Well, it's actually insurance.
Right.
That covers the gaps because the dilution effect, where our foods don't contain the nutrients that they purport to claim because USDA food tables aren't accurate.
Right.
And so labels aren't accurate.
Right.
Means that, it means 2 things. It means, 1, you're not necessarily getting as much as you think.
At all.
And 2, when there's government surveys, the NHANES survey that the government does every few years, and they do surveys of the population and estimate how much of the RDA, or they call it daily value nowadays, of nutrients that people are getting. They're basing that on the food tables
the original
that
tables.
are inaccurate.
Yeah, that have never been updated, never been changed.
They're still showing that up to 90% of the population is deficient in nutrients like magnesium, or 60% are deficient in vitamin D.
60%. The numbers are nuts.
Yet, I know, but yet that's an overestimation based on the food containing what it says it does.
It's supposed to. Yeah.
So it's even worse than we think.
Than we even think, yeah. Whenever I give people, I think most people aren't even clear on what the USDA is that whenever I give people multiple that are not super familiar with our industry, and over 20 years of doing this, I've watched this, multiple times, thousands of times, where they go, oh, geez, this has got 2,000 times the USDA. Because in our brain, 100% is the top, is the most. And I explained to them, the 100% is the amount that we've determined is enough to avoid you getting a deficiency to cause a disease. In other words, that's the bare minimum. You see 100% and think the top, it's the floor. What is it, 60 milligrams of vitamin C is what we found in the late 39, 40, is what it was what the body, is the threshold before the body develops scurvy. Who's the last person who got scurvy in this country? It's been 300 years since someone's got scurvy,
Well,
I know, I'm being general.
No, but actually heart disease is considered to be almost scurvy. That people have a
acute, but it's not.
They're close to scurvy.
Exactly, but it's not enough to really diagnose this. I've seen that. Yeah.
Why are the arteries falling apart?
Right.
Why is the collagen falling apart?
Yeah.
And it's often a lack of vitamin C. And the way we know this, in animal models, they take animals that don't make their own vitamin C, like guinea pigs or certain other animals. There's only about 20 species of mammals that don't make their own vitamin C. Higher primates and humans, fruit-eating bats, and guinea pigs are basically the list. There might be one or two others, but that's about it. If they take those animals and deprive them in the diet of vitamin C, they get heart disease. Their arteries start falling apart. They get plaque. They don't normally get plaque.
Yeah.
If you take an animal that does make vitamin C and you damage their liver so they can't, or breed them where they can't, so you could block an enzyme, then they get plaque and heart disease too. So you can actually develop plaque and heart disease in animals and models by depriving them of vitamin C in a variety of species, so we know
and that's just
likely what's happening in humans.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's just one. That's just one deficiency. Yeah.
And that's what scurvy is. The blood vessels falling apart.
Yeah.
This is just a
scary breakdown. Yeah.
A very minor case.
Yeah.
Again, and going to your point directly about the high multiples of the RDA or daily value, because you see daily value on labels. And there's a disconnect between RDA and daily value.
Right.
Because RDA is set by the Institute of Medicine. The daily value is set by the FDA.
Yeah.
And for example, in 2010, the vitamin D levels were raised, the RDA from 400 to 600. But the FDA never published an update in the Federal Register that would change the daily value. So we still have 400 as the daily value on supplements, even though the RDA is 600.
Yeah, isn't that amazing? Well, someone that there's going to be so many people that all of this information is brand new to. You know what I mean? That this is and it is a lot to take in. It can be overwhelming. If there was one thing that you could kind of explain or reach out to that group just to kind of give peace of mind or just give more control, I guess, put more control back in their hands, what do you think? What would it be? What would you be able to tell?
Well, the information is out there for example, each nutrient has what's called an upper limit, which is a safe level. And if you look at something like, let's say, vitamin B12, the RDA is 6 micrograms, 6 millionth of a gram a day. There is no upper limit. There is no toxicity to this. The other thing is, why is there no upper limit? Because you only absorb about 1% of the oral B12 that you get. So that's why you see these 2,000 times the daily value type numbers on labels, because you take 10,000, you're only going to absorb about 100 of it.
Yeah.
If you take 1,000 micrograms, you're only going to absorb about 10, and the RDA is 6.
That's a great point.
And it's not toxic. So
it's a great point. I think people have that perception because we equate everything with drugs in this culture. So we see B12, which, as you and I know, is just could not be a more important or vital basic nutrient, and people immediately start asking, what are the side effects? Because we've been conditioned to believe that all there's. With something I saw a little while ago, the EU, or the World Institute of Health, said that 75% of the world's drugs are consumed by the U.S.
We consume the vast majority of the world's drugs, and we're 5% of the world population?
Yeah, and we're the ones with all the rampant disorders. You know what I mean? It's at a certain point, people have to kind of connect the dots on their own and say, we consume more calcium than any other country on the planet, and yet we have the highest levels of osteoporosis. There's obviously something missing in those extra questions. So
yeah, and it's such a top-down regulation in this country. For example, there's a dispute going on now over drugs because people who have been diagnosed with fatal conditions, who have 6 months or a year to live, they're being prohibited from trying experimental drugs that have already passed safety reviews but have not proved to be effective for their condition. And they're not allowed to access those experimental drugs.
Because the drug has already been past those safety recommendations for one particular condition and not another?
No, it's passed general safety review. But they haven't proved that it's going to be effective for any condition yet, or certain conditions yet.
Pointless.
And because of that, they're prohibiting these patients from getting access, asking the researchers or the drug companies who make that, sell this to me, I have a fatal illness, I have nothing to lose. It's not going to kill me. The safety's already been shown.
Right.
Why can't I try it and see if it helps me, even though you're going to wait for these multi-year clinical trials to approve it? I'll be dead.
Yeah. Are they afraid of the liability? Is that the
It's the federal government. Who knows?
Who knows? Shadowy, yeah. Outstanding.
I'm sure the drug companies would be happy to sell it to them if they had some liability protection.
Right.
And if the government would allow them to.
Okay.
But the government right now is prohibiting that. And it's becoming an issue in Congress now.
Yeah, I was supposed to say that's a fairly new trend, right?
Yeah.
Because I know there's a few drug manufacturers in Seattle that have kind of folded up for that exact reason. It was like we couldn't get it to market. We had everything. We passed phase 3 trials, blah blah blah, and then one government agency with one bizarre, archaic, rule locked everything, and we locked up the doors, and everyone lost their jobs. So.
Well, if you assume that the FDA's budget is about 60% supplied by user fees rather than taxpayer dollars, they have every incentive to jack you around and get more and more fees and submissions and
every incentive.
Yeah.
Why would they? Yeah, people always say like, well, how come the FDA doesn't do a better job? Because their perception of again from a taxpayer money going into a regulatory industry. I'm like, no, that's not what it is. That's not what's going on. They can barely keep track of how many rats they're putting in our Pop-Tarts. They can't. It's their interests lie elsewhere.
Yeah, I mean, another myth is that the dietary supplement industry is unregulated.
Right. That's a huge one. Yeah.
And, speaking as somebody who works for a dietary supplement company, that's really false. We are regulated by the local and the state health departments. We're regulated by the FDA. They come and audit us every couple years. They require us to follow good manufacturing practices. The Food Safety Act and the Bioterrorism Acts require us to be registered. We have to register every year or two, depending on the class of company, with the FDA, so they know where these companies are. They have recall authority under the Food Safety Act. The DEA is regulating us because we have empty capsules and capsule making machines and things that could be used to produce drugs.
Yep.
Alcohol, tobacco, and firearm regulates us because we buy organic alcohol to make extracts and things like that and products.
Massively regulated.
Of course, the IRS and all these other, there's probably 12 agencies that are regulating us in different ways. The FTC does it in a big way. The Federal Trade Commission
for claims and
and advertising.
Yeah, but you're right. That's a huge misperception. People always say, "Well, this is completely unregulated." Like so, always like, "No, it's highly, highly regulated." I used to import a lot of products from Asia from a couple companies, and it's mindless working with customs. And this is pre 9/11, right? Is they would take us our a dozen boxes and keep them in the warehouse for like 2 months. I'm like, I got to sell these to customers that are waiting, but you can't rush the government. They're going to do whatever they want. And so I go, what part of – and I'm not trying to be a jerk. I'm trying to be helpful so I can get the products out. But I'm like, I'm just curious, why would you stop my order? Did something flag? Is there something I should be aware of? I was trying to be proactive, right? And they're like, no, we just wanted to check it out. I'm like, well, then why is it taking a month? Again, I'm just going like, I'm willing to help you out. I'll show you any paperwork you want. And they just arbitrarily, they were just like, yeah, we'll get to it. They could care less. And then at the end of all that, I finally get it out. I get all the products out to the customers that are waiting. I'm like, finally. And then I get a bill from them for the warehousing fees for the last month and a half. I'm like, who asked you to keep it for a month and a half? And there's absolutely nothing you can do. You know what I mean? And that's just like a microcosm of that level of...
That's like a towing company charging you for holding your car.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Well, this has been informative. Did you have fun?
Oh, yeah.
Always. Great conversation. Always good talking with you. And we'll put up on the website if people have anything they want to add to the conversation. We'd love to hear. If there's areas we missed or things that you thought might be good to hear from next time. He's a smart guy and he's got tons of information. So it's been a blast. Thank you for having me or having you. How about that?
A pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Hey, everybody. Hope you enjoyed the episode. We want to thank our sponsor, Now Foods. You've heard me on other interviews talk about minerals and aminos and enzymes and all the various other basic components that comprise us as human beings. If you've ever taken a digestive enzyme before, barbecue season is coming fast, and now is as good a time as any to start. If you haven't, just go to our online store, grab the Now Super Enzyme to get yourself covered for the summer. And remember to sign up and become a member. It's only, as I talked about earlier, it's only $1 a month. You get discounts to everything in the online store, like the Now Super Enzymes and the MCT oil, plus all the members-only bonus content and special events. It's I cannot express to you enough how many exciting things we have coming in the future. And it's a wonderful way to get involved and keep us in the loop. So get into it enjoy the summer and take care of your health. Take care of yourself. Lean into it. Thanks. Hope you have a great one, and we'll get you another great episode next week. Peace.
Everything You Know Is Wrong should be listened to for entertainment purposes only. Although some guests on the show are medical doctors, most are not, and the host is barely even a person. Nothing you hear on this podcast or read on our website should be considered medical advice. Consult your doctor and use common sense before doing anything you might think have a lasting effect on your body, mind, and spirit.